So the other day I found myself humming the song Firework by Katy Perry. The first few lines, do you ever feel like a plastic bag drifting through the wind wanting to start again? And I haven't actually heard the song in many, many years, but I heard a song that was similar to it, and that's why I ended up humming it later that day. And as I was humming it, it brought back so many really vivid memories of middle school and of a related start of my journey in discovering the self-help and self-development genre. And since I have this channel, which is a productivity and self-improvement channel, it started me down this path of thinking, what am I doing in a way? Because I'm really deeply critical of self-help as an institution. And today I'm going to tell you exactly why. Hi, I'm Ria, and welcome to Chatty Wednesdays, a series in which I pretend to be your roommate, giving you advice on all topics of life advice, and pretending to talk to you about deep topics of sorts. Y'all, my tea of the day is Puka's nighttime tea. I don't know how I feel about it because it's really sweet. Like, it's pretty calming, but it's overly sweet, so I'm not a fan, but I think it might grow on me. Since we're getting personal, let's start with my personal story of the song Firework. Back when I was 11, my family moved to the Philippines from my native Ukraine, and I didn't actually speak any English really, but I entered an American international school, and it was rough. It was really rough not speaking the language and trying to make friends. In all of the 6th grade, I managed to only make 2 friends, which I was very happy with. They were great friends. But problem was both of them moved away at the end of that year. So grade 7, I had to start all over again with brand new friends, and I didn't know where to find them. I started hanging out with like my old friends, mutual friends, but I didn't feel like they quite accepted me. And they were these quiet kids, and we would sit not in the cafeteria, but in a hallway away from everyone else because we weren't liked by the popular kids. And I would look at the popular kids and they had everything I wanted. They could hang out with the boys I liked, who wouldn't even look at me, by the way. And they had really nice clothes, and they had all of these friends, and they would go out and they could sit in the cafeteria without being afraid of anyone. So I wanted to be like them. And I was really socially awkward. I didn't know how to make friends. I know, hard to believe now. But also, the social world of an American international school was a whole alternate universe to the school that I had in Ukraine, okay? I went to a public school in Ukraine in a small town. It was completely different. The kinds of things that were cool, like no relation at all whatsoever. So I remember I was in this bookstore. My mom took me somewhere to this random area of Manila where I never went before or since. There was this one time we were there, and I was sitting in this bookstore, and I somehow came across the self-help section. And I saw this book. It was bright pink, and it had glittery letters on the cover, and it was called How to Win Friends and Influence People for Teenage Girls, or for Teenagers, something like that. It was basically an adaptation of Dale Carnegie's really famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, but it was rewritten by his either daughter or granddaughter or niece, some female relative of his, to appeal to teenage girls. And I was hooked. Here was a book that was telling me step by step how to win over the hearts of the popular kids. I thought, this is it. I don't need anything else ever. And I took the advice in this book to heart. I learned that I needed to make eye contact and smile at people and ask about their day. And all of that sounds really obvious now in hindsight, but honestly back then I didn't know that. I was completely clueless. And I so distinctly remember I spent weeks in front of the mirror trying to perfect my smile so that I would smile the way the popular kids would smile on their pictures. Because in Ukraine, we don't smile the same way Americans do. And also in my middle school, for some reason, there was this trend of smiling really wide and like raising your eyebrows and squinting your eyes. And it looks terrible, but that's how the cool kids smile. So I trained myself to smile over and over and over so I could smile like that. It wasn't a natural facial expression by any means. But I did it, and I started listening to all the cool music. I remember messaging one of my friends being like, what music do the kids these days listen to? And that's when she introduced me to like Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber, and most notably Katy Perry and the album Teenage Dream. That's how I found Firework. And I remember listening to the song Firework at this time and thinking, oh my god, yes,
I'm gonna be just like a firework. I'm gonna burst out of my bubble and I'm gonna win over the popular kids and show them what I'm made of and that I'm cool. And
you can probably tell from my tone that I never became a cool kid. Honestly, look at me. Of course I wasn't a cool kid. The popular kids thought I was hilarious, and not in a good way. They thought I was a joke. And they started kind of half talking to me for entertainment. And I realized that they didn't actually want to be my friends. And I was so heartbroken. And grade 7 was honestly like one of the worst years of my life. And I ended up being bullied for a few years. And I honestly didn't feel at home at school until my senior year. Why am I talking about all of this? I'm talking about all of this because back then when I was a middle schooler, I was very vulnerable and I found self-help that was promising me all of the answers. These simple solutions to my problems, right? And I did everything the book told me to, but it didn't solve my problems. And I realized that pretty early on, and I realized, okay, I have to look at self-help with a critical lens. Like, it helped me become much better at speaking to people, but it didn't magically solve all of my problems, right? So now when I approach self-help, I always remember that experience is always in the back of my mind. I approach self-help with a grain of salt. And not everyone does, because a lot of people come into it later in life when they're in even more desperate situations. I was just a kid dealing with popularity problems. It wasn't that big of a deal. I didn't have money on the line or a marriage or something gigantic. So I wanted to talk to you guys about the problems with self-help as an industry and as a genre. I watched this excellent video by James Johnny, I think, that was called The Toxic Culture of Self-Help. I'm gonna link it down in the description and you should watch it, it's great. But it's basically about how self-help scams you. He was talking about this addictive cycle of pretending like you're actually doing something by reading a self-help book, and how you feel like you've accomplished something and you feel this bout of inspiration, but then you don't actually do anything to change your life. So to feel this again, you just buy another self-help book, and it just becomes a self-fulfilling cycle of an addiction to these self-help books and these bouts of motivation that they produce. But I think the problem goes even beyond this addictive cycle and this exploitative industry. Yes, there's an exploitative industry of scammers and self-help gurus and all of that bad stuff. But even beyond that, I think there are problems with self-help existing in the first place. So the Western world, and that's where this genre really exists, in the West, especially in the US, is obsessed with this idea of self-improvement, with big emphasis on the first part, on the self. Self-improvement is egotistical. It is very self-absorbed as a pursuit in the first place. And I think we should look at that very critically, because it's such an individualized look at what makes a good life. We have become so obsessed with looking inwards and trying to solve problems right here that we forget about everything that's around us. And I think it's so important to think about this right now in the pandemic, as we're really isolated, because by trying to improve our lives in a vacuum, we let go of some of the most meaningful experiences in life, which are interactions with other people. That's where a lot of our meaning comes from in the first place. And, the idea that one can make oneself is fundamentally flawed and mistaken. So this ideal of, rational self-mastery comes from ancient Greece, like a lot of our ideas in the Western world do. And if you think about it, these philosophers, these men who were professing to develop themselves, how did they do it? They did it because they had slaves and they had women doing all the domestic work for them and caring for children and caring for the sick and caring for anyone that wasn't philosophizing with them, and putting food on the table and sewing their clothes and just dealing with all of that non-glamorous stuff. And so they had that time to sit around and philosophize because they weren't doing the hard, unglamorous work. And this continued and developed into this mythology in the 19th and 20th century of the self-made man or the self-made woman later on. And that, once again, that was predicated on the unspoken and unacknowledged labor of women in the house and of people of color, especially in the 50s and the 60s, most of the 20th century. There was always somebody working for a minimum wage or sub-minimum wage without many rights who allowed these self-made men flourish and took care of their shit, excuse my language. And because this ideal was sustained on this unacknowledged labor, there's this gap between the squeaky, clean nature of to-do lists and schedules and David Allen's and all of these productivity systems and the actual messiness of real life. Because what are you going to do with your schedule if your child is sick and is throwing up? You're not gonna say, oh no, I was supposed to deal with you at 5 p.m. and it's only 1. You can't say that. Real life is messy. Things happen. And if you're taking care of other people, you can't just have a neat to-do list. And so all of these self-improvement techniques are pushing real life onto the margins. I am able to do a lot of this self-improvement stuff because I live alone. I don't have to deal with anybody else's schedule. But back when I was in college, I had to deal with the fact that my roommates sometimes didn't sleep at the same time as I did. Actually, they didn't most of the time. And yes, I wanted to wake up at 6 a.m. and feel all cool, but they were hanging out at 2 a.m. and being loud, and I got really mad at them all the time because they didn't fit in with my perfect vision of the world. But also, it wasn't fair that I expected it. It wasn't fair that I read all of those books and I expected life to just conform to these rigid standards that I imposed upon it. And every self-made person has so many people's labor behind them, right? But contributing to the success of others, so bringing others up and sacrificing things for their sake, that's not valued in our society at all because it's not economically valuable. And so nobody considers that success. We look down on, stay-at-home mothers, even though they do so much work and they help us so much. My mother wasn't a working mother most of my childhood. Like only when I was very little, but after that, she wasn't working, and I owe a lot to that. I owe a lot to the fact that she sacrificed her time like that, and now my little siblings, she's taking care of them full time, and when it's not her, it's the nannies. So there's always somebody taking care of these kids, right? And even if you don't have a nanny or if you don't have a stay-at-home mom, the nurseries do. And right now we're feeling this impact so much because nurseries and schools are closed down, and suddenly all of these mothers have to juggle work and taking care of their kids, and the fathers suddenly can't escape the messy reality of home, and everything just falls apart because the illusion is shattered, and it really is just an illusion. And because we don't value this labor of taking care of others, a lot of self-help is actually very subtly reinforcing stereotypical gender norms and stereotypical ways of who handles what in society because it's profitable for self-help. That there is an underclass of people that takes care of other people and doesn't get valued for it. The second we get rid of the system of exploitation, suddenly not everyone can neatly do their to-do lists all the time because there's nobody left to pick up the slack. That's why a lot of self-help texts, and I read a book that gave so many examples, and I don't remember the titles of these books anymore, but it gives so many examples of, these gurus giving women advice of like, oh, taking care of a child is the most important thing in life. You should get rid of your to-do lists. You should just
live in the moment.
And that's so problematic for many reasons. First of all, if productivity is supposed to be about living your best life, then how can you say that something is too valuable for to-do lists? That means you're admitting that productivity has limitations and some valuable things go beyond all of these self-improvement systems. Also, another thing that I think is very interesting, there is a correlation between the number of self-help titles and decline in economic security. So the less secure the economy, the more self-help titles there are. Why? And yes, I'm kind of assuming causation here, but I think it's related. I think it's related because when you have less people being stable financially, then people start looking to ways to get ahead. People start looking for unusual or inventive ways to change their life and to turn their circumstances around, right? And that's where all of this self-help stuff comes in, because it's promising a solution. And it's a good time for all these gurus to, start professing their answers. Therapy is also so individualized, and therapy and self-improvement together are kind of scapegoats for societal problems. We put the blame for societal problems like economic insecurity, lack of human rights, lack of social protections of all sorts. We put it on the individual, and we force them to carry the burden on their own and to deal with it themselves as if they're broken. Yeah, of course, if you got sick and you spent all of your money on hospital bills because you didn't have health insurance, now you're gonna need therapy. But if you just had health insurance in the first place, you probably wouldn't have needed therapy, Like, I'm not saying that people don't need therapy. I go to therapy myself. I have multiple mental disorders and I need treatment for them. But I don't think as many people need therapy as are going to therapy these days. I think the industry is profiting off of this focus on digging within yourself as opposed to trying to find problems in society and trying to fix the societal problems. I just think it's fucked up. I just think it's fucked up how we blame individuals for larger problems. And, workers are made to compete in such harsh conditions, and they're asked to continually work on themselves and to improve continuously, so nothing you ever learned was going to be enough. You're always made to strive to be better and better and better, because otherwise you might lose your job. And there's so much pressure and there's so much stress, and of course all of this self-help stuff comes in. And I recognize my hypocrisy here. I am a channel about how to succeed in your startup job. But that's just because that's the reality of living here. And okay, now we're living here, so what can we do as individuals? I don't have any tools for social change personally. And we need to start asking, who is self-improvement actually improving? Thank you for listening to my Chatty Wednesdays. I'm going to be doing quite a few of these. I'm going to do another one in a few weeks. I hope you enjoyed this format. It's a little more rambly than my usual format, and my setup is different, as you can see. But I hope that was interesting to you, and let me know what you think. And I'm going to be linking to a few of my videos over here somewhere, so please watch them. I love you, and bye-bye!